Good evening, friends. Welcome to the conversation at All Saints. I'm the Reverend Jonathan Wickham, and I'm your host this evening. This is part two of what we hope will be an episode list of thousands in the conversation at All Saints. The attempt here is to create a way for us to share conversations that matter, conversations that deepen our journey, that deepen our life together, that call us to a broader, more profound awareness of where we are and how we are being. If we're having any of those conversations right now in the world, they involve COVID-19. Last week, we began the conversation with our first conversation. We were talking about the issues of racism, racial reconciliation, and a book by our guest, Dr. Greg Garrett, who wrote a wonderful book on racism and film. I recommend you go back to the YouTube files and see last week's conversation. This week, we do pivot to COVID-19, and we pivot to COVID-19 particularly here in the Coastal Bend, but I think what we will talk about is applicable everywhere you are. Here in South Texas, we are dealing with a surge, and in the world of surges, with a pandemic, that is not good news. We're struggling right now, and we have some people here to talk about where we are and how we can be together here in the Coastal Bend and wherever we are. We have with me tonight Dr. Gregory Buck. Dr. Buck, if you wave when I introduce your name, Dr. Buck is the associate professor and director of the Biomedical Sciences program at TAMU Corpus Christi, Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. Dr. Buck is also a member of the TAMU CC COVID-19 Task Force. We also have Jason Lewis with us. Wave to us, Jason. He's a research assistant at the Conrad Blucher Institute, also at TAMU Corpus Christi, and a member of the COVID-19 task force there as well. We also are delighted to have Dr. Margarita, or Maggie Muniz, MD. She's an emergency room physician at Physicians Premier Emergency Rooms here in Corpus Christi, with many, many years of medical experience as, I believe, an internist and an emergency medical doctor. We're also delighted to have Katie Gorman with us. Katie is a principal at Ella Barnes Elementary School here in Corpus Christi, and she is the senior warden at All Saints. The senior warden is the chair of the board, so I'm delighted to have Katie. And we will have in a bit later on, we'll have Lee Shaver, and she is an associate clinical professor at TAMU CC's College of Nursing and Health Sciences. And we also have with us right here, Dr. James Tyree, urologist of the Corpus Christi Urology Group here in Corpus Christi, and a lifelong, I believe, Jim, you're the only one here who is a cradle local Corpus Christian. Am I right about that?
I don't know about the other people, but I can vouch for myself.
So we have a lot to talk about and a great group of people to talk about it. The way we're going to do this is we'll talk a little bit the first half hour about what's going on, where are we, and the second half hour about what does that mean. But before we continue, let us take a moment to have some silence, and I'm going to read a psalm that will be our opening prayer. So maybe we can all hold just a bit of a silence, and then we'll have the psalm. Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. It is he who shall keep you safe. The Lord shall watch over your going out and your coming in from this time forth forevermore. And amen. Amen to that. So the first question today might be directed to some of the folks who are connected to the TAMU CC panel, the advisory group on COVID. What's going on? What do you see right now in the world of COVID-19? Maybe as far as the spread of this virus is unfolding. What are we seeing? Dr. Buck?
Well, basically right now, we're looking at what one may consider to be very rapid growth. It's going very, very quickly, very high. So the professor in me wants to actually draw something, so I'm going to do that. So if you can look right here, there's a graph, and this is going to be days since, and this is pretty similar to what's seen in the New York Times and also what's been on TV. So what we're seeing is, and it's really sort of like that. It's really going, the curve is slowly with days, we're getting increased number of cases per 100,000, and it's moving upward. So that's what we're seeing now.
You know, when you look at graphs, it's easy to see numbers. Those numbers are people. Maggie, you see a lot of people as you do your work in your clinics. What are you seeing as you interact with people where you are?
Well, definitely the numbers are going up exponentially, and people are mostly very scared. This is a very serious disease, and it's presenting in many different ways. So it's really, really different than anything I have ever been exposed in my lifetime as a physician.
Jim, Tyree, I don't know if I have you muted or not, but there you are. You've been a physician here in Corpus Christi all of your medical career. You've been a physician for quite some time. You come from a family of doctors. How does this fit into your life experience as a physician here, or as you've heard of anywhere else?
It's tough. It's tough for the healthcare providers, and it's tough for the patients. In our own practice of 10 providers and 60 employees, we've had to make major changes to the way we deliver care because of the virus. And it's been incredible how everyone has responded, and it's been equally as incredible how some people have disresponded. I mean, we've literally had to hire a security guard in our waiting room this week because of patients and their families who refuse to abide by common sense and the law. So I'll say it's been quite an awakening. It's been a real game changer. It's in some ways it's helped us understand what healthcare is really necessary. As of tomorrow, we're no longer once again able to perform elective surgeries in the hospitals. And that just kind of points the finger at what really is not elective.
Oh, right. Well, that's a whole can of worms. Wow. That's got to be a fascinating conversation. What you consider to be elective surgeries, who gets to make that decision, by the way? Is that each physician, or is there a standard of that?
It's a each hospital system decision. Some hospitals are more lax, some hospitals are more strict. The ones that I mostly work at have us fill out a questionnaire as to why this operation is necessary, and in the face of the risks of exposure of the patient and exposure of the hospital personnel, why we're doing it on this day instead of delaying it a month.
All right. Well, that's fascinating. We talked a bit about, Jim, Dr. Tyree, you mentioned a bit about how behavior or how people's conduct is a part of this. And that connects to the large conversation that we've been having really as a human family, which is a conversation, as it began, Dr. Buck, with numbers. But then those numbers can become, I think, abstract. So what people do in their particular behaviors doesn't always follow through on what might be really going on. Jason, I'm going to get to you right here. You're a numbers guy. What are, as you kind of look at the numbers, or as you gather data, what's the data telling you about how we're doing as a community?
Well, I mean, all you really have to do is watch the daily presentations the city's giving. Just the fact they've gone back to daily presentations instead of weekly speaks volumes. Today it was 270 something people confirmed positive with COVID.
Wow.
I gather hospital statistics. The hospitals, in order to be considered a trauma level whatever, they have to provide data as requested to the city and the county, and we were given access to that so that we could provide that data then and model for our leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching the hospitals fill up. It's a scary situation right now, and I don't know. It's stay inside. That's really
right.
I mean, that's your safest. If you don't have to leave your house, just don't.
Right. Well, so in the midst of those numbers and what we're learning about the hospitals, one of the questions that have come to me, and by the way, let me just pause here. If anybody who is watching has a question, please use the chat to ask a question. And we'll get to that. We have somebody that's helping out and curating that chat as well, making sure that those questions get onto the air and get asked. So please do that. And we ask the panelists if you have any questions that I'm not asking, because this is a conversation. This is not just a panel. This is a conversation. So if any of y'all here have a question, please feel free to jump in. So, one of the interesting things about the numbers is that, and maybe this speaks to what maybe is the disconnect, is we see all these numbers, but then we don't always, we didn't see these numbers for the longest time, and now we're seeing numbers, and now we're being told that numbers will get worse. And Dr. Buck, maybe you can give us a little, I don't know if you can, I'm going to put you on the spot though. If you can't, just tell me. But maybe there's a little infectious disease 101 to do here, because there's this lag time between infection and showing symptoms, and the time to prevent the bubble that's going to come later is right now. And by the time you see bad numbers now, it's probably meaning worse numbers in the future. Did I get that right?
You get that right, Father Jonathan. Again, I'm not a clinician. I'm a researcher, not like Drs. Muniz and Tyree, but I can give you the basics for Infectious Diseases 101. Roughly, it takes from the time that the virus enters your body till you start showing signs and symptoms. And signs is what the doctor sees in his or her office. Symptoms are what the patient complains about. What brought you into the doctor's office in the first place? That's the difference. Okay. Usually for this virus, it's roughly between 5 and 14 days. I would guess the median time, and this is what Mr. Jason Lewis can talk about. There's something called a 95% confidence interval, which is basically where 95% of your population is going to fall. And I believe that's roughly between 5 and 10 days, but it can be as long as 14. And that's really what this is all about. That doesn't mean that everybody's gonna show that. Everyone does not show, and I'm sure Drs. Tyree and Muniz can talk about this more, but everybody does not show the typical signs of SARS coronavirus type 2, also known as a COVID-19 infection. Everybody does not present, and that's the term, that's the medical term I'm going to use here, the same way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the emergency room right now, we are thinking that everybody has COVID-19 until proven otherwise, because the presentation is very different. So, like Dr. Buck said, is very relevant, because a lot of times people present too early. And then other times people are very scared, so they do not come until it's absolutely a little late.
And then
But
if
we're
you wait
seeing-
too long, there's a very good chance if you've waited that long, you probably have spread the disease if you haven't been self-isolating. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. And the problem also is that if you absolutely do not have an emergency, like Dr. Tyree was saying, the best thing is to stay away, period, from any public places, emergency rooms, because
Right.
unfortunately, there's very little that we can offer
Right.
at this
Right.
point.
Dr.
Yeah,
Tyree, Jim, what do you have?
From my perspective, that's the major challenge of this particular pandemic is the asymptomatic carrier. The person out there who is infected with the virus, who has absolutely no symptoms and is carrying on their life as if nothing's going on, and they're spreading it to someone else who then can become gravely ill. That's why activities like wearing masks and social distancing are so important, even if you feel good. And I think later on we get into what are we going to do with this. So I'll leave it there.
Yes, spoilers, we have a second half. Yeah, Dr. Buck?
I just wanted to say, and probably Drs. Tyree and Muniz can chime in on this, for a lot of diseases, the percentage of a population that's a carrier is usually no more than 5 to 15%. For this virus, it can be anywhere, I've seen in the literature, anywhere between 25 and 45%. That's really high for carriers.
Okay, got my attention. When you say carrier, what do you mean?
That you have the virus. I'm sorry, Dr.
No, go ahead.
Go.
Basically, as I'll let Dr. Muniz go ahead and chime in, but a carrier is somebody who's carrying, who has the virus is reproducing in their bodies, but they're not manifesting, but it hasn't reproduced enough to manifest signs and symptoms.
And some people do not develop symptoms, period, which is, part of the problem. So we don't know the actual rate of infection is due to that, and the fact that we have not been testing everybody. Now the testing has improved, still not known.
Well, so then back to the human crisis that's at hand. One of the communities that most got impacted by this very human experience is, basically any place that has density of humanity gathered together. So of course, here I am in a church. Yes, that's us. But I'm thinking about schools, and I'm thinking about little kids. Katie, tell me about, what life is like for you on the ground as a school administrator. I know you're on summer break, but you probably have the weirdest summer break right now that you've ever had. What's it like on the ground right now for you?
We have to, as a district, we have to go from what TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and the governor, what parameters they give us. So because Texas, they gave us some parameters on Tuesday, but because Texas now, all over Texas, has had this surge in numbers of cases, not quite sure if those parameters are going to change, because right now they're saying children will not have to wear a mask. They haven't said what adults have to do in the building. We were given, that it could be 10 students per classroom with social distancing within the classroom. We just don't know yet. The district has come out, Corpus Christi ISD, has come out that there will be face-to-face and distant learning available for all students. So I think that's just so parents can breathe and, know, okay, so if I don't feel comfortable sending my child to school, there is no alternative for me.
We're going to hear more from you because I cannot imagine being involved in education right now and thinking ahead, but we're going to talk about the ahead conversation in a second. Before we pivot away from what life is like on the ground, we have a question from the chat. The question, I'm going to read it right off the transcript, says, I often hear people say the numbers are higher because more tests are being performed. What is the educated response to this? Is the positivity rate really increasing? I'll leave that open to anybody who wants to respond. Sounds like Jason wants to jump in.
Yeah, that's Dr. Bird. I don't know if the people that are watching this or the panelists have seen Dr. Bird present on Friday afternoons, but he addresses this in all of his presentations. And it's statistically, it is not the case that more testing, more positives. We're actually watching the rate of positives increase without a change in the number of tests.
So what's important is that there's a ratio, right? There's a rate of positives per.
It's absolutely been
grouping?
Increasing. I think 15 to 20% now is what we're seeing. So it's absolutely increased.
Okay, that's tremendous. Another question from the chat related to how we are doing. There's a question related to testing ingredients. Apparently, there's a concern about the depletion of testing ingredients, and I wonder. The chat says, I wonder who is in charge of sending or providing these. Are test kits being provided by this federal government, city, county, or private enterprises, private testing agencies? Anybody know anything more about that, where these tests come from?
I can give you the general aspects of it. The test that's done for this virus is actually, it's called a PCR test. That's short for polymerase chain reaction. And technically, it's called a real-time quantitative polymerase chain reaction. Let me put that to you in plain, simple language.
I'm going to need to write that down.
Okay. Polymerase chain reaction, let's say you have, and I'm going to use another illustration since I'm at my office desk. Let's assume that this is nucleic acid, and everybody has nucleic acid. And Principal Gorman, I'm going back to the days when I was actually a high school science teacher before I got a PhD, so I know you would appreciate this. But let's pretend that this is DNA, which is double-stranded. DNA is actually going to become, it actually undergoes a process called transcription, and it becomes RNA. The virus, SARS virus, is actually an RNA virus. And in order to determine whether or not you have this DNA, you have this nucleic acid, is that you actually have to undergo the polymerase chain reaction, which is going to convert this back to a double-stranded DNA. And then you're actually going to quantify, you're actually going to measure while the reaction is going on in a computerized system, how much double-stranded DNA gets converted. And that's what you're measuring. And that's quantitated. The old-fashioned way that I did with my grad student this afternoon is you run it on an agarose gel, which is like gelatin. What modern quantitative real-time PCR does is that it actually does it in a machine, and it's sort of measuring it. It's a very expensive process. Roughly, the process could cost, because the reagents and the chemicals, they're fairly specialized, it could cost anywhere between $200 to $2,000. So in general, you really want to do this when you have a large volume, because that makes it more cost effective.
So
I'm sorry, Father John, then go ahead.
Where do those tests, who has that testing equipment locally?
Locally, hospitals, laboratories such as Quest Lab. I'm pretty sure that for Dr. Muniz, her Physicians Premier probably has a lab where they do it. The Nueces County Health Department. There are all sorts of things. In theory, we have the machinery to do it at A&M Corpus Christi, but we don't have the permit from the university system to actually run the test here, because the test is, SARS is a virus that is actually, there are 4 levels of biosafety. SARS is actually a level 3. We're only mandated to do up to level 2. So in theory, we can do it. We've got the machinery, the reagents cost money, but because of that system mandate, we are not authorized to actually do the testing. But that's what the testing is about. So whether the tests come from federal, state, or local, or tribal governments, the answer is it depends.
It depends. And then the supplies to run that test probably is highly variable as well from place to place.
That is correct. Certain companies do produce the supplies, the reagents, the chemicals to do it. You also need specialized plasticware. We don't do these tests anymore in test tubes and beakers and things that you remember from high school chemistry. It's actually more plasticware, polystyrene types of plastic. And we also need to do these things with the chemicals, and the chemicals are expensive, and they also have to keep either refrigerated or frozen.
So a very particular kind of process.
Yes. You're not going to walk off the street and do polymerase chain reaction the old-fashioned way as I do it, or the new-fashioned way as would be required to measure for this virus.
Right, right. We have another question that came in related to the test rate and the positivity rate in the community, and it came in from somebody who's going to be a panelist in just a minute. Lee Shaver, who many of us know from TAMU and from here at All Saints, asks, how many people in the community are likely positive that we don't know about? I don't know if any numbers can be assigned to that. Anybody want to take a stab? You're being recorded, by the way.
We don't know. As Dr. Buck mentioned, we are right now, the number that you got today from the city, the 270, that is a snapshot at 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So look at
back to Dr. Buck's point about the time it takes for the incubation for the symptoms to show up for somebody to get tested.
We just take that as that's 2 weeks ago. So if you go back to Dr. Buck's graph and you saw that go up, assume that that's gone way up. There you go. Thank you. That has continued, and we are 2 weeks beyond what you see today.
That's the weird thing. This is reminds me a little bit of Doctor Who. I just laid my geek card on the table. There's a little bit of time travel here. I mean, it's not a straight line we're looking at. It seems like that we're not looking at right now. We're looking at what happened in the past, and that's really hard for us all to get our head around.
It is. That's been the biggest challenge is that someone goes out, they go to HEB, and they don't have their mask, and they're fine. And so, what the heck? Why do I care? But in 2 weeks, you get sick, and you've already spread this to your household and your friends. And so, Lee, I don't have a good answer other than just assume every single person you come across is infected. That's really the only thing you can do. You have to be safe for yourself and your family.
Right. Well, now we get to the second half questions. Anybody want to talk before we go off? What else are we seeing? Let me just finish with this. What else are we seeing on the ground, or what else are you seeing on the ground that we really need to be aware of, or that is maybe the untold story? Yeah, Katie.
I just like to ask a question, Dr. Muniz. So when should a person go get tested? I mean, if you like right now, all the stuff in the air is like you got a scratchy throat, you got a runny nose, you don't have fever or anything, but will they not test you if you're asymptomatic?
We test. If you come and you want to be tested, we test.
Oh, okay.
What we're trying to make people understand, like Dr. Buck was explaining, is that it takes time for this test to become positive. And sometimes what you're getting is a false sense of security that the test was negative when it's too soon.
Right, okay.
So as long as you take those things into consideration, then we do test.
You know, it's amazing. I've got there's so many stories of people who, thought they were a little bit sick, did not get tested. Then a family member has COVID, they come positive. It turns out that the person who was a little bit sick was the carrier. I mean, this is a perplexing scenario, and it seems like the more we are grasping at firm things, the more those firm ideas or thoughts get slippery and kind of slip out of our grasp. And that's the nature of this, isn't it? I mean, this is not a we're not going to answer all these questions. We're only going to have more conversations, right? I mean, I think that's right.
Yeah, and like Jason also said, the key is to protect yourself and others. Wear your mask, isolate, and quarantine. We cannot stress that enough, and I know it's hard to do. Believe me.
Yeah.
I have grandkids, but that's the way to go.
I'm going to promote Lee Shaver to a panelist. I introduced her before. She's an assistant professor of nursing at the university here. Lee, you're just about ready to come online. I don't know if everybody can see you, but I can see your name. And I don't see your face yet. Maybe your camera needs to be activated. While we're waiting for that to happen, you know, it seems like the question is, how do we live? How do we do this life together? Because, you know, I'm in the people business. Everybody here that I see, you're all in the people business. Whether you're in university setting, nursing setting, whether you are in an education church setting, wherever you are, we're human beings, we're people. How do we live well in this community or in any community right now? And Maggie, you kind of started us there. We've got to be mindful of our masks. We've got to keep our social distance. What else does anybody have to say about how we live together? What do we need to be doing? Or did I just steal all the thunder?
I'd say number one, even though we can't be physically connected, we've got to be emotionally and virtually connected.
Okay.
Everything that we can do to stay in touch with our friends, to stay in touch with our family, however we can do that, we've just got to keep it up, because the whole psychological impact of this pandemic, I think, is going to be one of the longest lasting legacies of the pandemic. I mean, economic, sure. Medical, physical, sure. But the psychological impact of children not being able to play with their friends, of grandmothers not being able to see their grandchildren, of mothers and fathers not being able to be with their kids. I mean, it's big. And so I'd say staying connected in all ways that you can. And this also is a time that church is really important. I'll leave it at that.
I know there's more in your heart to say, and I know that we've talked about it many times. Lee, as a nursing educator, you know, your work, it's funny, I know your work because I know your nurses. I meet nurses all the time, and I'm so honored to say, do you know Lee Shaver? And they brighten up, and I say, she's a friend. She's a church person. But, you know, when it comes to living in the midst of COVID, it also means we've got to care for one another, and nurses are trying to care for people. Other people are trying to care for people. What are you telling your nurses about how to care for themselves, for their families, for their patients, for the community?
That is a huge issue. I have 84 students in my class right now, and I'm so fortunate. I think I have about 8 faculty. We've all divided them up into clinical groups, and we have probably maybe a quarter of our students with significant issues going on. Family issues, health issues, financial issues. And so that whole piece of being aware, being open and approachable so people can come to you with those fears and concerns, and then connecting them with resources. So much is communication. We are always talking to our students, let us know how you're doing, because they might have a family issue going on, right? We hear that a lot. You know, I thought I was, just like you said, I was feeling a little bit bad, but then my dad got sent to the emergency room via ambulance, right? Well, so that's a student that's worried about doing their work and missing class. And so we need to try to deal with that. But then it's also this huge educational opportunity because we are teaching them during a lifetime of event and trying to get those lessons across of when you are out there caring for people, where they're coming from, what they bring with them, and how we still have to have that human connection.
How has
and to
nursing,
do that, we have to take care of ourselves.
sorry about that, but how does nursing change in the midst of this, or does it change? Is it a matter of doing what you've been trained to do, only really better or more consistently? Or is nursing, and we can probably talk about this with education, with teaching, I don't think there's a world that looks ahead a lot like the world we just left. I think, am I right about that? Is nursing itself going to change?
Nursing at its core is the same. We are adjusting to the situation, just like nurses who went and worked in Africa during Ebola. They had to adjust to the situation. And so that is what's happening with this disease. And every week I'm having new articles that I'm sharing with my students because the information is changing constantly. So it's a great example of you have to learn through your whole life. You get your degree, but you're going to keep learning for your whole life. But the key pieces of nursing, and some of the stories are so beautiful, of nurses asking family members to send pictures because the patient that they're caring for, they can't recognize, and the patient is prone, they can't see them. And they want to know who that person is and talk to them about their family, even if they're unconscious. Like that is that human caring piece that should never change, no matter where a nurse is working or what is happening in the world.
So if there's a list of people that are going to have challenges, healthcare professionals, of course, looking ahead in a pandemic. Katie, how do you talk to your teachers about coming back to school and being teachers in a classroom of, particularly in elementary school, where physicality matters, right? Closeness matters.
It matters.
How do you talk to teachers about that, or what are they talking about?
So a former teacher actually of mine had posted something on Facebook the other day as she was going through the TEA guidelines, and she's just like, I got halfway through and I'm just in tears because I have, a large part of teaching, like nursing, like we connect, we build those positive relationships with our students and our families. You want the family to come in, you want them to be involved, and we're going to have to figure that out. I mean, we have a lot of things to figure out. But I just reassure my teachers that whatever is coming down the pike here, we're going to get it figured out and we're going to do it well, because that's what we do. Within a matter of a very short time, every teacher had to be able to do distant learning. Every teacher had to be able to provide for their kids, distant, Zoom meetings and learning and teaching. And I will say they rose and to the occasion. And I know that we can do that again. But the hard part is that connection, that relationship. It's hard to do that if you're just doing Zoom meetings. But we'll figure it out. We have to. That's what we're here for. And we are concerned. Also, Jim talked about the psychological. We are concerned. Right. It's not just academics with us. It's also the social emotional learning of the child. And, how do we look at that, complete child, not just that they're behind because, distant learning maybe didn't go so great in their households, they did the best they could. The family did the best they could. And now what can we do to step in and really provide those intervention and things to help catch them up or keep them on track, as well as providing for their social emotional learning, their growth, and, what all of this has brought up in them and caused in them. you know?
You know, there's no way, and I think Lee, you mentioned it. This is a generational event. When these events happen, as we might maybe have experienced ourselves, or also as others have experienced before us, you never know the path through them, but you know that somehow you will be changed, and you don't really know what that change is. The elementary school teachers are going to be with a group of kids who are being formed with this as their reality. They will not know a reality that does not include this as their starting point.
Exactly.
That's a pretty incredible thing to realize, that this will be a kind of a starting point. As we look forward, there are, of course, some questions to ask about how this unfolds. I don't know that I've heard many people talk about how these kinds of things play out in terms of the science and the statistics. I've seen many people say things like it kind of works itself out, or there's maybe a mutation that happens that is maybe more treatable, or there might be some effect with seasonal changes that might be impactful. How does this play itself out? Any of the scientists, doctors want to respond to that? What happens what's it going to look like when we see COVID fade away? Are we going to know?
I don't think we know right now. Okay. And that's important question, because not only we don't see what's going to happen as far as whether or not the virulence is going to go down, but also winter season is coming up, and then you get other problems, influenza. We're very concerned about that.
The seasonal flu.
Yes.
There's a reason it is called the novel coronavirus.
Say more about that.
We've never seen anything like it before. It just does not behave like any other virus that has crept on the face of the earth. There are certain commonalities, and I'm not that type of scientist, but just from what I can see, the whole behavior of this critter is just not stepping into any box that we want to put it in.
Jason, when you think about numbers, what numbers are you looking for that might bring a smile to your face? I mean, really?
Wow, that's a good question. I haven't even thought in those terms.
Or Dr. Buck, you're another person on the task force.
Yeah, it's not even anything that I'm considering. I'm thinking of the numbers that we have and how the hospitals are filling up, and we have July 4th coming up when people get crazy. Yeah. That's where my emphasis is.
Right.
If we've got daily numbers that started going down, or heck, at this point, even just leveled off, that would be a positive.
Well, so that's helpful to know. So leveling off is itself a place.
Yes.
Step. It means we've done something right.
Okay. That's helpful to remember. So as we look at this, as we go forward and pay attention to the news, when we start seeing, or hopefully we will start seeing something level, then we can say, okay, now, and then the next step is continue the practices that have gotten us there and then keep going forward. Is that right? All right. Dr. Buck, what happens to a virus when it is no longer a problem? Does it change or do we change?
Actually, Father Jonathan, a combination of both. And I'm going to focus on what Dr. Tyree mentioned. We've had coronaviruses here, but he said this is novel, and he's 100% correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of the viruses that cause common colds, they're rhinoviruses, but coronaviruses come a distant second. And there are basically 4 strains of coronavirus. What Dr. Tyree is alluding to is the fact that we've actually had the SARS coronavirus, which popped up starting in southern China, Guangzhou, and around the Pearl River Delta in 2009. We've had the Middle Eastern respiratory virus that popped up in the Mideast around 2012 to 2014. But this virus is very, very different. And I just saw on one of the chats, somebody said that the virus is mutating. For that person who contributed that is correct. The virus is mutating. where it's mutating, it's in the spike protein. And when you look at coronavirus, gets its name not from the beer, the Mexican beer, but it gets its name because all the spikes surround it and they form a crown or a corona, which you probably, Father Jonathan, know from your studies of Latin and Greek and, seminary.
Okay. Yeah, sure. That.
Okay.
This kind of halo around.
Yes. So that
the corona is something I do not have.
Okay. Well, you've got more than I do. You've got far more hair than I do. But for this virus, those spikes allow the virus to attach to what are called ACE2 receptors on many of our cells, including our lung cells. But the reason that Dr. Muniz was alluding that you have to assume everybody has it is that you can also find these ACE2 receptors on gastrointestinal cells. So you can present with diarrhea.
Oh,
you
wow.
can present with heart problems because these receptors are also on some heart muscle and also on your blood vessels. And recently, they've also described that in some types of nerve tissue, you may find the receptors. So that's why, as Dr. Muniz and Dr. Tyree said, when you assume, there's an old saying, you make what out of you and
That's
me,
right.
and you can't assume anything now. And I'm sure Professor Shaver is also telling her students that as well.
Yeah. Don't make assumptions. And if you're sick, as Maggie, as you said, you're seeing people and saying, we're assuming right off the bat that they have COVID-19. Well, so here's a question that came from one of our participants, one of the people watching the webinar. And the question is, I struggle with how and when do we come together as groups when infections are low enough? When will we be able to do that? Is there a way that we'll know that? They go on to say, I value communities and my fellow arts leaders and artists are under tremendous duress, as are other community leaders. And while none of you is a community leader professionally, teachers and nursing instructors and professors and all, but we are all members of a community. We are together members of this faith community of All Saints Episcopal Church. What are your thoughts about that? How, what, and maybe it's not a question as much as it is a collective, because the creative, faith inspiring, the idea people, all of these wonderful things that we do as human beings, as I say all the time, anything that we do that matters, we don't do alone. I mean, anything we really truly do that matters, we do in community in some way. And to not have that be as free flowing, how do we live? How do we continue to keep going? I think that, Jim, you mentioned the miracle of technology. I wouldn't call myself a technical person, but here I am hosting a webinar. But I can say, God, it's good to see you guys. And I think I say that every single time I get on a Zoom call or something like that with people. Anything else anybody wants to add in response to that, that really heartfelt?
I think it's okay for us to acknowledge how hard that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've had students say, I always thought that class was a joke, but now I really miss going to class and miss being there with my peers and my faculty and meeting in your office. And so I think we're all grieving that, missing that connection. Like, for me personally, all of y'all know that I'm a single parent. Being at home and working from home, I heard somebody say, we should call it living at work now, which is really what it feels like.
Nice.
I've realized how much support I got from my colleagues at work every day doing this parenting gig. Like, those were my backup people. Yeah. And I still talk to them and we use different technologies, but we miss each other. So I think we all have to acknowledge this is hard. We are social creatures and we're used to being together, and it is really hard. But as an old public health nurse, just back to your question of what do you think about when you think getting better? I think vaccine. That is what I am hoping and praying for. And when we have vaccine, that's when I think we'll really be able to get back to normal.
How long does that take?
Well, I think in a regular time, it would take years. But the scientists around the world are using technology to work together. It's really amazing. And to try to exponentially, but we want to do something that works, and we want to do something that is safe. So you have to do both of those things. And then you think about trying to immunize the whole planet. But you know what? We got smallpox off the planet. So polio's almost gone. We can do amazing things as a human family. So I'm hopeful for that. And
as you said, together. I think that's the key. Is this idea, and I'm a faithful person. I'm a person who speaks out of the Christian tradition, and at the heart of the Christian tradition is a story about birth and resurrection, birth, life, death, and resurrection. This idea that that cycle is revealed in our story as human beings and all of creation. There is an interesting cycle here. And we kind of touched on it in various ways, that we are finding ways to be together that we never dreamed about, and meeting people that, we either had met before very briefly, or we haven't ever met before, but we're forming friendships online. At All Saints, we have a morning prayer and an evening prayer service called Compline, and there is a small group that takes care of one another in both of those services, and they include people who have never laid eyes on each other, but they're tended and held beautifully well. Some of you are part of that. It's a beautiful thing. Well, so I'm going to say this to you. I'm going to give you each of you a chance to load up on a last word. If anybody here has a last word that they want to share, we got about 9 minutes left. I'm going to do a little advertisement. That's going to take up about 7.5 of those. Okay, I'm just kidding. It's just a few things to say. And then, but I'll give each of you a chance to kind of say the last word and make sure that we had any questions answered that are lingering out there. So if you're in part of the participants are watching, you might want to get your last chat question in. The conversation at All Saints is an offering of All Saints Episcopal Church here in Corpus Christi. It is a new offering. We hope that this will continue on this format on Zoom. This is the second of 2 episodes so far. We are looking forward to doing many more. We're going to take a week off next week. I think we'll reload and come back the Tuesday after that. I look forward to being with you there. I think we're loading up on a conversation about creativity and what does it mean to be in the midst of this crisis and this stay-at-home world we are in, and how do we find the creative opportunities to be about creation, about giving life and new life. So we're going to be exploring that conversation in a couple of weeks. I look forward to having some great people around the table, the virtual table, as it were. And as a ministry of All Saints, we're supported by the generous offerings to the parish. So if you are inclined or you are moved to make an offering that can support this ministry, we would love to have you do that. If you want to know more about that, go to our website, www.allsaints-cc.org, and you can connect to ways to give and to support this or any of the other great things that we do here at this parish. And I will commend you to take on generosity as a pattern of life, whether or not you give to All Saints. The pattern of life that really does change our lives is a pattern of generous living, gratitude-based living. So however you do that, take on that. I think that will be good medicine for all of us in the midst of this time. Okay, that was my spiel. That's 2 minutes. Last word on my screen. I'm going to go clockwise, beginning with Jason, and then I'm going to call on Katie next. So Jason, your last word. Anything you want to say?
Fair enough. First off, thank you. Just having the opportunity to get some information out, maybe just talk about this, I think is really healthy. I have a question. I've been looking on Facebook and I don't see this there. Where do we find this? Is this being
on the YouTube channel?
YouTube.
All Saints Episcopal Church Corpus Christi is our YouTube channel. That's a far too long thread to search for, but that's the way it is now.
Okay.
We'll fix that, but it's on our YouTube channel.
Fair enough. The one important thing I didn't get to was about masks, and there's a lot of controversy, and it looks like some of our political leadership is starting to unify and give a unified front. But I saw a study, and I thought I would share that as a point. Someone watched in China where people wear masks much more. They're much more comfortable with masks. They even wore them in their home. Mm-hmm. And someone was positive, and there's many cases of this. I don't remember the numbers, but there were cases where people were positive and they did not spread it to people in their same home because they all wore masks. Now, if that doesn't prove that masks work, I don't know what to do. Anyway.
If you get that study, send that to us. We'll make sure that gets attached to this as we mix it back down. Okay. Katie, last word.
I just want to say hopeful. As you know, through beginning of creation through now, humanity is creative. We will find a way through this. We have scientists, we have educators, we have health professionals, and so artists, and that gives me hope. So I think that we need to hang on to that hope and not become hopeless.
Wonderful. Jim, then Lee. You're muted, Jim.
Sorry. Hard to follow, Katie. But I'll just get more concrete for a moment. I don't think that we are going to get a handle on this pandemic until three things occur. Number one is an accurate test. Number two is a treatment. And then number three is a vaccine. And once those happen, then we're in good shape. But until then, respect your neighbor, love your neighbor, and do your best to not spread it or get it.
Lee, then Maggie.
I just want to remember and remind all of us about kindness. When we're dealing with people out in the world, we don't know what people are dealing with on their own. And this is a very hard time for the community, for people's families, individuals. So just that kindness, whenever we can, go that way.
Maggie.
I can't stress this enough. Mask and social distancing. That is the most important thing right now until we get a treatment or a vaccine. Very, very important. And hope. We're out there and we're answering questions all the time, and just reach out.
Okay. And the last word from the panel, Dr. Buck.
I'm just going to recapitulate everything that everybody else has said. See this? This is a mask. Wear it, use it. The other thing, and I don't know how many people are younger, but maybe Professor Shaver can use this as an example for her classes, because I actually teach virology in summer too, so I will talk about it then. But all of the professionals here have to go through what's called continuing education units. And I can say for Principal Gorman, when I was doing 9th through 12th science teaching, I had a whole lot of continuing ed I had to do to maintain my teaching certificate, and I still maintain it under the state of Georgia. But for the younger people, everybody here, and Jason, you have to learn different computer programs, you have to learn different programming languages. For all the people here, be prepared to live the rest of your life learning, because this will not be the first pandemic. This will not be the last.
Oh, that's some good stuff. Mic drop all around the room. You all are wonderful. I'm tremendously grateful. Thank you to all of the people who came and participated and who chimed in on the chats. Wonderful questions, you all. Thank you so much. This will be available on our YouTube feed and eventually on our Facebook feed, contrary to currently what's going on. And we invite you to share it, spread it around, start the conversation. If this helps, I'm glad that it does. God's peace to you all. God bless you. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And as we've said before, guard your health and guard the health of your neighbor. God's peace. Good
Same
night.
to you. Good night.
Thanks for having the conversation.
Right.